all of a sudden the car started rocking, and I just assumed it was Mike back there. He was pushing down on the fins of the car, and we didn't kind of know what was going on. It wasn't Mike. Mike was heading towards the house, and the car just was moving really violently, and Ed said, "It's an earthquake." And for some reason, we all piled out of the car, like all the doors opened up, and we had a hard time getting out. There was 4 of us in the back seat, and the car was moving so violently that we almost had to get out on the downswing, and the open door was hitting the ground. It was so violent. My name is Tom Gilson. I've lived here all my life. What can I tell you about him? Not much.
He looks kind of serious.
Yeah, being kind of on your own since 7th grade, and I was always, life was serious, and maybe I'm not so serious now, but I've had reason to be serious, and that's me. You have to understand, this is March 27th. We probably had, the roads were clear of snow, but we had a good ice buildup of probably about 5 or 6 inches, I would guess. And so I walked with, I had half hip boots on that came up to the knee. They were cut off, and I was walking around town, and I remember we were on Hobart Street, and I looked down, and there was a full box of 22 shells that had fallen out of someone's vehicle, and boy, I looked at that and I thought, wow, this is great. This is like my lucky day. So I grabbed those and put them in my pocket, and so I felt pretty good. But we were bumming around town just with nothing really on our minds, but the thinking, of course, was the Chena was in the Liberty ship that was the Alaska Steamship Company ship that was in there that week, that day. Just came in, I think 4 o'clock in that afternoon, and so in the back of our minds, we're thinking like we all did, and there wasn't a whole lot happening, so what was happening was down to the dock. And so back of our minds, we were going to go down to the dock at some time while I was here, whether it would be Friday or Saturday. And a friend of mine, he was riding with his brother. He just got this car. It was brand new to him, but he had gotten a loan for it. It was like an $800 Oldsmobile. It was probably a 1958 version, had a nice big back seat. And he picked up John and I. Dan, I think, went home. And there was a Casey Bedingfield, a kid that I went to school with, and Henry Irish. We were all in the back seat of this car. And the driver was Henry's big brother, Ed. And he just, like I said, he got a loan for this car from my dad at the bank. And so we were talking at the post office with a gal, or I would say us kids in the back seat weren't, but the driver was. And because we were probably there for 15 minutes chatting up this gal, we didn't go down to the dock. We were on our way down there. That was at the post office, and it was probably about 4 blocks away to where you went onto the dock. And we were headed that direction and got down to the last place that you can exit in front of the Wells Commercial Hardware store, and we saw there was a chain across the roadway. It was taken down, but cars would drive over it. And I remember Ed, the driver, said, I promised my mom I'd be home for dinner for a change, and because we wasted 15 minutes down at the post office, that wasn't that was probably an unusual phrase, but he said, "No, I promised my mom I'll be home for dinner, and I'm gonna go home for dinner this time." So he turned left at the only exit we had left to us, and went a block to the south and a block to the east, and parked right in the middle of the road because there was a a fellow, his acquaintances, we all knew him. His name was Mike McElroy. He was out in front of the house. He lived in the house next to Bill Egan's house. And so they were talking, and probably 2 minutes into the conversation, they finished up and Mike departed and we were getting ready to leave, and all of a sudden the car started rocking, and I just assumed it was Mike back there. He was pushing down on the back of the fins of the car, and it turned out that we didn't kind of know what was going on. It wasn't Mike. Mike was heading towards the house, and the car just was moving really violently, and Ed said, "It's an earthquake." And for some reason, we all piled out of the car, like all the doors opened up, and we had a hard time getting out. There was 4 of us in the back seat, and the car was moving so violently that we almost had to get out on the downswing, and the open door was hitting the ground. It was so violent. And so it took us a while to get out of the car. We finally got out of the car, and I noticed the trees were just going crazy, and the telephone wires were breaking and falling down, and they were live wires. And some people said, "Stay away from the wires." I don't know who it was that said that, but we kind of ran up to the intersection there in front of the Pins-On bar. It was McKinley and Broadway, and by this time, people came out of the Pins-On, and people that were shopping downtown. There was a whole bunch of us in that intersection. And but see, this is probably, I would say, probably 3 minutes into the earthquake. It took us that long to get out of the car. And the earthquake, it was still going as strong as ever, and it was noisy too. And what I noticed when we got into the intersection was all the ice that was 5-6 inches thick was busting up on the streets, and everything was cracking and shaking, and I'm sure we went down on our knees several times during this. And I remember this because John Hiller's mother came, for some reason. She was downtown, and she reminded me, I said this, like I said, we're trapped. There was no place to go, and everything was busting up. And so it's a panic situation. You don't know whether life is coming to an end. Well, it certainly did, and we found out later for about 32 people. But we thought it was the end of the world, the way things were busting up and everything. And so I went home, and I found my mom and the dog were at the house. My 2 brothers were at another house uptown, and we all met there except for my dad. And then my mother had to go because she was the anesthesia person she was an RN, registered nurse, and she was needed at the hospital. They started bringing some people off of the boat. Then we ended up going out of town, and we waited for the folks. They finally showed up, and I ended up going to 27 Mile Camp up on the pass. I was underneath a big table, just trying to find a place to lay down. There were so many people. God, I remember early in the morning, the coach's wife, Mrs. Groudon, had come through, and we had already heard that my PE teacher, he was my PE teacher in 7th grade, Jim Groudon, he had his 4-year-old and 2-year-old down at the dock, and the word was that he was seen from the boat. When the earthquake happened, everything was shaking, he grabbed one kid under each arm and tried to book it for the shore, and never made it. The dock separated from the shore, and they all went down and were lost. But she spent a lot of time apparently walking the shoreline for all that night. And I remember her coming in, and man, I remember looking at her face. I was looking out the window, and she was coming into 27 Mile Camp, and she just had the weight of the world on her face. And that was it really brought home to how tragic this whole thing was. And obviously, it's a hard. When I tell that story, it's tough because that was one of the key moments for me about how tragic it was. And oftentimes, you know, we've talked about this over the years, 62 years now, and we all look for the humor parts because you're shadowing your fears or your how panic-stricken you were with humor, but there was some things that weren't very funny, and that was one of them. And I've sat through a lot of these deals at the school. We're talking to the teachers. This is probably 35 years ago, and I was there with Gloria Day, Walt Day, John Kelsey, and all of these, you know, people that were adults at the time. I was just a kid, and I'm listening to all of their stories, some of which I'm hearing for the first time. We all took our turn. I was about the last person. I'm listening to all their stories. When they got down to me, I'm just about ready to break up because I heard these stories for the first time and a lot of things, and it really busts you up.